The 9,873rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Hans Grunberg, Special Envoy of the Secretary-General for Yemen, Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under-Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, and Ms. Nesma Mansour Ali, Peace Track Initiative. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Hans Grunberg.
Tack, fru ordförande. Madam President, may I begin by wishing all Yemenis and Muslims around the world Ramadan Kareem as they start this period of reflection and coming together for the holy month. While Muslims around the world are celebrating the holy month of Ramadan, unfortunately, this celebration will not be complete for the families of many of our colleagues in arbitrary detention by Ansar. The absence of their family members will be deeply felt during a month that should be one of gathering and connection with their loved ones. Some will even be grieving, as the family of our World Food Programme colleague Ahmed. Some colleagues' parents have also passed away while they have been in detention without knowing the fate of their children. I once again call for the immediate and unconditional release of the detainees, and I'm grateful for this Council's continued support on this issue. Madam President, it is now over 10 years of this unresolved conflict. The grinding hardship that Yemenis are suffering only deepens. Since its onset, GDP per capita has more than halved. Civil servants in Ansar Allah-controlled areas have not been regularly paid on time or in full since 2018, while those in government of Yemen-controlled areas also face some delays to their salary payments. Moreover, the Yemeni Riyal in government of Yemen-controlled areas has fallen by 50% in the last year, driving up prices of basic commodities. As a consequence, poverty has surged across the country. Madam President, in past months, I have cautioned repeatedly against escalatory actions. Recently, we have seen a rise in rhetoric from the parties to the conflict, pre-positioning themselves publicly for military confrontation. We must not allow this to happen. Words matter. Intent matters. Signals matter. Mixed messaging and escalatory discourse can have real consequences, deepening mistrust and fueling tensions at a time when de-escalation is crucial. While a resumption of large-scale ground operations in Yemen has not occurred since the UN-mediated truce of April 2022, military activity continues. I remain concerned by recent reports of shelling, drone attacks, infiltration attempts, and mobilization campaigns, more recently witnessed in Marib, as well as in other areas such as Al-Jawf, Shabwa, and Taiz. I therefore also reiterate my calls on the parties to refrain from military posturing and retaliatory measures that could risk plunging Yemen back into widespread conflict, where civilians will again pay the price. Madam President, as you know by now, my team and I remain undeterred by the challenges we're faced with. We continue relentlessly our frank and important engagement with both Yemeni and international stakeholders, actively gathering perspectives and insights on the path forward amidst enormous challenges. Last week, I engaged with Government of Yemen senior officials and regional actors, urging concerted support to a Yemeni-led inclusive peace process. I maintain that to settle the conflict in Yemen, you will need to address a set of three particular challenges. The parties will have to agree on a nationwide ceasefire and a mechanism on how to implement it. They will also have to make difficult but necessary concessions and agree on compromises, notably on the difficult economic situation in the country. Finally, and let me be clear here, there will have to be a political process that includes a broad spectrum of Yemenis that will allow this conflict to settle once and for all, enabling Yemenis to live their life in peace. While this is possible to achieve, the environment for this to happen must be conducive. During the last month, we have seen the continued cessation of attacks by Ansar Allah on vessels in the Red Sea and targets in Israel. This is positive, but as this Council knows all too well, enabling environments for peace can be fragile and fleeting. Positive developments must be put on a more permanent footing, and the international community must not waste any opportunity to make progress, and we must be agile in our approach in supporting Yemeni-led efforts. Madam President, the implementation of the US designation of Ansar Allah as a foreign terrorist organization is now unfolding. While the full ramifications of this measure are yet to be determined, I reiterate the importance of protecting our efforts to advance a peaceful settlement in Yemen. In order to reach a just and inclusive peace in Yemen, it is essential that the mediation space for Yemenis, under the auspices of the United Nations, is preserved. I remain committed to continuing to carry out my duties in accordance with the mandate given to the Secretary-General by this Council, including convening meetings on a number of pressing issues, including for the exchange of conflict-related detainees. I see and I hear the deep frustration of Yemeni people who continue to bear the heavy burden of a decade of war, and I remain grounded in my conviction that principled and impartial resolution of conflict is the only way forward. As such, the elements of the roadmap continue to represent a viable path. In this regard, I am deeply grateful to this Council for its unity and support to the UN's work to support Yemen in this difficult time. Madam President, in 2 days, we will celebrate International Women's Day. This month and every month, we observe the disproportionate impact of the conflict of women in Yemen, and we work towards enabling their full, equal, and meaningful participation in the peace process. Recently, a delegation of extraordinary women and representatives from women-led organizations across Yemen met with my office. They shared their powerful stories, perspectives, and unwavering advocacy for their rights. The transformative work they lead, advancing women's roles, strengthening their communities, and ensuring women's inclusion in decision-making is critical. These women represent just a few of the many determined Yemeni women tirelessly working to advance peace. Their efforts reinforce our commitment to continue working with and supporting local women peace builders and human rights defenders. I am therefore also looking forward to listening to the statement from Nesma Ali Mansour from the Peace Track Initiative, who will be bringing to our attention the intersection between the climate crisis, conflict, and the deterioration of human rights in Yemen. Madam President, in conclusion, let me be clear. Yemen's current trajectory is deeply concerning. We are at a point in time where the fear of a return to full conflict is palpable. No matter how the next weeks or months evolve, my office remains determined to convene the parties at any opportunity to bring an end to this decade-long conflict. We owe it to the millions of Yemenis not to waver or falter in our determination on this. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Grunberg for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Tom Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Special Envoy Grunberg, for your tireless efforts. Madam President, when I last briefed the Council on Yemen, I shared detail on the gravity of the crisis, and we discussed the growing constraints on our humanitarian work. Since then, both have got worse. And now, severe funding cuts have been a body blow to our work to save lives. It is, of course, for individual countries to decide how to spend their money. But it is the pace at which so much vital work has been shut down that adds to the perfect storm that we face. I have asked our humanitarian coordinators in Yemen and elsewhere to report by the end of next week on where we will need to cut back most dramatically and the implications of the tough choices we are making on which lives not to save. I won't repeat the list of humanitarian numbers in my last briefing. It is more incumbent upon this council to focus on how we use your collective weight to deal with the causes of those numbers. So my three asks of you haven't changed. Firstly, please back our effort to get access to those civilians at greatest risk. Second, please ensure we have the funding to save as many lives as we can. And third, a request for your public and private pressure to release humanitarians who have been arbitrarily detained while working to deliver your instructions. Madam President, as Special Envoy Grunberg underlined, we're approaching International Women's Day on 8th of March. After decades of progress on women's rights, too slow, but still progress, we are now seeing globally a sustained and deliberate pushback against equality. We must recognize this danger and we must respond. So I want to focus today on the humanitarian situation faced by women and girls in Yemen and the impact of funding cuts on their lives. And I'm afraid, Madam President, that it is a grim picture. The crisis has a disproportionate and devastating impact on women and girls. They've suffered from systematic discrimination, exclusion for decades. 2021, Yemen ranked second to last in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index. In 2023, it ranked second to last in the Georgetown Institute Women, Peace and Security Index. And there is no sign of progress for them. I don't know whether the numbers really convey the challenge, but here are some to think about. 9.6 million women and girls in Yemen are in severe need of life-saving humanitarian assistance, facing hunger, violence, and a collapsing healthcare system. 1.3 million pregnant women and new mothers are malnourished, putting their own health at risk and exposing their children to disease and long-term issues. Yemen's maternal mortality rate is the highest in the Middle East, more than 10 times that of Saudi Arabia or Oman. More than 6 million women and girls face heightened risk of abuse and exploitation. 1.5 million girls in Yemen remain out of school, denying them the right to education and preventing them from breaking the cycles of discrimination and violence facing them. Nearly 1/3 of all girls in Yemen are married before the age of 18, stripping them of their childhood, education, and future. As your funding for Yemen evaporates, the numbers in my next briefing will be worse. But what does that mean for women and girls who are the humans behind those numbers? More will die. More will be left with no choice but to adopt dangerous coping mechanisms, survival sex, begging, coerced prostitution, human trafficking, and selling their children. And yet, Madam President, despite bearing the greatest burdens of this war, of displacement, of deprivation, women remain on the front lines of survival and recovery, raising kids, pushing day to day for a better future, rebuilding communities, pushing for peace, often with little recognition or support. These are acts of quiet heroism, dignity, and resilience. And we will do all we can to support them with the dwindling resources that we are given. This includes a doctor in Aden, one of only 2 women fistula surgeons in the country, performing 30 surgeries a month, who received UN-funded training to specialize in this critical field. It includes a midwife, the first to work in Hadramaut Governorate, and whose work and the work of her colleagues has been critical to the decline in maternal mortality. And it includes the widowed mother in Al Hudaydah Governorate, who cares for her 3 children, one with a disability and one in need of ongoing medical treatment, and for whom the support of humanitarian partners is essential to her ability to do so. just 3 examples among thousands that I hope resonate through the noise, distraction, and the attacks on humanitarian work. I'm not here to defend programs and spreadsheets and institutions, but people. I also want to recognize the women and girls who are on the front line of the humanitarian response. They lead half of the NGOs in our humanitarian country team. And 40% of the Yemen Humanitarian Fund goes to women-led organizations, the vast majority of them local NGOs. These funds ensured that pregnant and breastfeeding women got safe and dignified healthcare, that survivors of violence accessed life-saving services, and that communal spaces and sanitation facilities are safe for women to use. Madam President, as the humanitarian response in Yemen faces severe funding cuts, these programs are all at risk, and along with them, vital lifelines for women and girls across the country. Funding suspensions have already forced 22 safe spaces to close, denying services and support to over 11,000 women and girls in high-risk areas. Survivors of gender-based violence no longer have access to life-saving healthcare, psychosocial support, and legal aid. And child protection programs have been halted, leading to even greater risk of child labor, recruitment into armed groups, and child marriage. These are choices that we make when we cut funding. Madam President, on a separate issue, earlier this week, the US designation of the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization was completed. From the UN humanitarian perspective, our job remains the same, to save lives. We need to continue that work and ensure civilians in Yemen have access to essential food and medicine, whether through commercial or humanitarian channels. If this is not possible, it would have serious impact on communities already on the precipice of disaster. Women and children will, I am afraid, again bear the brunt. Madam President, this is a tough time to be a humanitarian, but it is much tougher for the people we serve. And right now, it is getting even tougher for the women and girls of Yemen. The decisions you take will determine whether it gets worse. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Fletcher for his briefing, and now give the floor to Ms. Nesma Mansour Ali.
President, Your Excellencies, thank you, Denmark, for giving me the opportunity to brief the Council. My name is Nesma Mansour Ali. I am the Senior Policy and Communication Officer representing Peace Track Initiative and Women's Solidarity Network. Our work focuses on climate justice, inclusive peace building, and protecting women's rights in Yemen. Today, I will highlight the urgent threats posed by Yemen's protracted conflict, climate change, and the deterioration of human rights. Yemen has been ravaged by over a decade of armed conflict, coupled with environmental degradation and climate crisis. These realities have weakened state institutions and collapsed social protection systems, creating multidimensional insecurities that left vulnerable population, particularly rural and marginalized women, on the brink of survival. I am a migrant of conflict and climate change. I was forced to leave my hometown Aden and parted with my family in 2020. Life at the time in Aden and continues to be unbearable, with scorching temperatures, chronic water shortages, and relentless power cuts at the time amidst of COVID-19. Every day was a struggle to manage the brief 2-hour window of electricity, juggling either to run the pump to fill the water tanks, or to do laundry, or charging our devices, or at least to snatch a few moments of sleep under the relief of air conditioning. Leaving Aden was a necessity for survival and a painful testament of how conflict and climate change can uproot families, can uproot lives, and tear families apart. President, Your Excellencies, the war have devastated Yemen's environments and ecosystem. Attacks on oil refineries and ports, indiscriminate landmines in agricultural land and coastal areas, leaks of oil and toxins, the destruction of critical infrastructure like power stations and water system left Yemen in ruins. I will never forget the towering plume of smoke that covered the city when the Houthis attacked Aden's refinery in 2015. A dark cloud choked the air and left the city in despair. This scenario repeated itself as Israel attacked over 24 oil storage last year in Hodeida's port. The marine systems are being destroyed. Oil spills, unregulated fishing, untreated sewage water have polluted the coastal waters, destroyed fish populations, and endangered public health. Landmines are making it dangerous to grow food or to access water, worsening food insecurity. Climate change is deepening the crisis in Yemen. Floods are displacing landmines and making the demining efforts more complicated than they are. They are also exacerbating the pre-war intertribal conflicts that are over resources that claim almost 4,000 lives annually. President, Your Excellencies, women, especially those who lead households, are disproportionately affected by climate change. A survey by our partners at South 24 found that 88% of women in Aden, Hadramaut, and Al Mahra have reported that climate change is damaging their income-generative activities, such as salt extraction, fish drying, and handcrafts. Additionally, cultural norms further hinder women's resilience, as they are often discouraged from learning to swim and leaving them vulnerable during floods and cyclones. Consulting with women across Yemen, I have heard heartbreaking stories of how the intersection of climate change and armed conflict is upending their life. Aisha, a fisherwoman from Aden, have shared the fish are vanishing. We are forced to wander into the dangerous water just to survive. Aisha's words shows the desperation of coastal communities as pollution, overfishing, and climate change deplete their livelihoods. Fatima, a woman from Al Mahra, shared how she survived Tig cyclone in 2023 that destroyed her family's agricultural land, their only source of income. Meanwhile, Sumaya, a young entrepreneur and a friend of mine, had to abandon her dream of opening a chocolate business due to rising temperatures, increasing costs of raw materials, and endless power cuts. President, Your Excellencies, the women's stories of determination amid vanishing fish, ruined crops, the deterred dream highlight their unwavering strength as they confront the harsh realities of climate change. As we approach Women's International Day and the mark of the anniversary of the Beijing Platform, it is imperative that we prioritize the impacts of climate change and conflict on achieving gender equality. To conclude, I call on the UN Security Council to act decisively before challenges push an already suffering population past the point of return, and to take into consideration these recommendations. First, prioritize climate-responsive peace building by integrating climate change into peace negotiations, ensuring that climate adaptation and environmental restoration are central to any peace agreement or political settlement in Yemen. Second, demand that the Sanctions Committee investigate environmental destruction as a potential war crime, including attacks on critical infrastructure such as oil refineries, ports, water systems, and demand accountability for environmental destruction. Third, ensure full inclusion of women in all peace and political processes, and support and fund local peace initiatives, including those that address intertribal conflicts over water and land. Fifth, promote environmental rehabilitation by supporting programs to clean up oil and toxin spills, remove landmines from agriculture and coastal areas, and restore damaged ecosystems, particularly in fishing zones and farming communities. Fifth, support enforcing environmental regulations, working with national and local teams, as well as international partners to strengthen environmental governance and regulate private sector activities that contribute to the pollution and resource depletion. Finally, provide targeted support for women-led households by expanding social protection programs such as cash transfers and livelihood support. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Mansour Ali for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Envoy Grunberg, USG Fletcher, and Ms. Ali for briefing us today. In particular, I want to fully endorse the attention they have brought to the plight of women and girls in Yemen's crisis. I also welcome the participation of the representative of Yemen at our meeting. I'll make 3 additional points. First, the UK welcomes the Council's strong and united condemnation last month of the ongoing detentions by the Houthis and the tragic death of a World Food Programme member of staff in Houthi captivity. Continued Council unity sends a clear and unequivocal message to the Houthis that they must unconditionally and immediately release those detained. We fully support the UN's decision to pause humanitarian operations in Sada. This pause is a direct consequence of the Houthi threat undermining the security and safety of aid workers. Ms. Ali and this morning's press stakeout have again highlighted how this already dire humanitarian situation is exacerbated by climate change, intensifying existing threats such as water and food security. Second, the Yemeni Coast Guard's announcement of their interdiction of a dhow containing advanced weapon components, reportedly destined for Hodeidah port, is more evidence of a clear violation of the arms embargo contained in Security Council Resolution 2216. We reiterate our call for all UN member states to ensure full compliance with the arms embargo. In particular, we call for the Iranian government to cease its destabilising activity in the region. UNVIM remains critical to preventing the smuggling of illicit arms. The UK calls on the international community to provide unwavering support to UNVIM and to ensure it has the funding necessary to fulfil its obligations. We also continue to support Yemen's Coast Guard as it looks to strengthen its capacity to protect maritime borders. In partnership with the government of Yemen and international partners, we look forward to the launch of the Yemen Maritime Security Partnership later this year. Finally, President, the UK remains committed to achieving lasting peace in Yemen and the broader region. Ultimately, long-term stability and security in Yemen can only be achieved through a UN-led inclusive political settlement. We will continue to give our full support to Special Envoy Grunberg in this effort. I thank you.
And I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President, and we wish you success in your tenure as President of the Council this month. Thank you, Special Envoy Hans Grunberg, Under Secretary General Tom Fletcher, and from the Peace Track Initiative, Ms. Nesma Mansour Ali. Thank you for your briefings and in particular for underscoring the continued Houthi threats to international peace and security and how the Houthis' creation of an untenable environment for continued aid provision in areas under Houthi control directly led the UN to pause all activities in Yemen's Sada governorate. The Security Council spoke with one voice last month by issuing a press statement condemning the tragic death of a World Food Program employee in Houthi captivity and demanding the immediate release of all those, including UN, NGO, and diplomatic staff, unjustly detained by the Houthis. Madam President, in line with President Trump's executive order on redesignating the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization, the United States is taking concrete steps to eliminate the Houthis' capabilities and has designated the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization, which was announced this week. The United States is also using targeted sanctions to deprive the Houthis of illicit revenues. Our sanctions seek to preserve space for legitimate activities that support Yemenis living in Houthi-controlled territory who bear no responsibility for the Houthis' malign actions. We will also take steps to stop Iran's support for Houthi terrorism in accordance with President Trump's national security presidential memorandum reimposing maximum pressure on Iran. We will take action against the Houthis should they resume their reckless attacks in the Red Sea and surrounding waterways and on Israel. Every UN member state has a responsibility to abide by its obligations under the resolutions adopted by this Council, including concerning the prohibition on providing arms or related materiel, as well as related to training or financial assistance to the Houthis. As a Council, we must respond to Iran's flagrant violations of our resolutions through its continued arming of the Houthis. We reiterate our call for this Council to take steps to strengthen the UN Verification and Inspection Mechanism, or UNVIM, and for member states to do their part by increasing funding for UNVIM's long-term planning, recruitment of staff, and critical infrastructure needed for enhanced capacity to inspect 100% of covered containers. The Houthis continue to attempt to hold the Bab al-Mandeb and global commerce hostage. The Houthis have shown little willingness or ability to distinguish among their targets, and their claims that their attacks have any legitimate basis should never be accepted. We also have already seen Hamas, another Iran-enabled terrorist group, advise the Houthis to keep their hand on the trigger for renewed attacks on regional states and international commerce. Member states must stop making excuses for the Houthis and cease propagating a false moral equivalency on regional issues. Houthi actions have done nothing for the Palestinian people. They have only endangered the lives of innocent, and they have brought more suffering to the Yemenis. The Houthis' obstruction of aid exacerbated the spread of cholera last year, and so-called Houthi authorities continue to routinely harass civilians and shake down small business owners. Now they are forcing Yemeni money exchangers to buy shares in a Houthi-controlled network for transfers, imposing their mafia-like control over the Yemeni private sector. The Yemeni people continue to suffer from this economic repression, and Houthi roundups, unlawful detentions, and sham trials are an affront to the international community. The Houthis have had many opportunities to de-escalate and set free the detainees. They have refused them all. Madam President, in recent meetings, many Council members expressed particular concern about the Houthis' sham so-called judicial proceedings involving a significant number of detainees. We categorically reject the unlawful process and strongly warn of any potential use of it as cover for politically motivated killings. We are closely monitoring these sham proceedings, especially if they move to the stage of handing out purported sentences in the Houthis' so-called state security court. If the Houthis do this, all donors must stand ready to respond with further concrete steps to reduce the exposure of their field staff and programs to Houthi abuses. To reiterate, the United States will continue to oppose the destabilizing actions of the Houthis and will not abide by any attacks on our interests. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, Поздравляем Данию с вступлением в права председательства в Совете Безопасности и желаем всяческих успехов. И благодарим наших китайских друзей за отлично проведенное председательство в феврале. Благодарим спецпосланника Ханса Грюнберга и заместителя генерального секретаря по гуманитарным вопросам Томаса Флетчера за брифинги. Также внимательно выслушали госпожу Али. Ситуация в Йемене остается непростой. Участившиеся в последнее время вооруженные инциденты на линии соприкосновения угрожают нарушить баланс сил и перерасти в неконтролируемую эскалацию, чреватую полномасштабным возобновлением военных действий. Не исключаем, что такая тенденция может быть вызвана в том числе накопленной усталостью противоборствующих сторон от стагнирующего процесса йеменского регулирования. Помимо этого, в стране наблюдается дальнейшая деградация социально-экономической сферы, сопровождаемая перебоями в электроснабжении, инфляцией и ростом цен на товары первой необходимости. Стремительно ухудшается гуманитарная ситуация, растет угроза продовольственной безопасности. Больше всего от этих неурядиц страдают, как обычно, самые уязвимые члены общества – женщины и дети. Несмотря на предпринимаемые официальными йеменскими властями меры, существенно улучшить текущее положение дел пока не удается. В близлежащих к Йемену акваториях пока сохраняется относительное спокойствие. Движение Ансар-Аллах, как и было обещано его руководством, в настоящий момент воздерживается от ударов по проходящим через Красное море и Аденский залив коммерческим судам. Однако было бы ошибкой говорить об окончательной стабилизации. Общая взрывоопасная ситуация на Ближнем Востоке дает мало поводов для оптимизма. С учетом того, что хрупкое перемирие в секторе Газа пока так и не перешло во вторую стадию, предполагающую прекращение боевых действий на постоянной основе, возникают серьезные риски для ситуации в акватории Красного моря. Госпожа председатель, в нынешних условиях у Йемена еще остается шанс преодолеть внутренние противоречия и встать на путь к устойчивому миру. Международному посредничеству в лице спецпосланника генерального секретаря сейчас необходимо приложить все силы для скорейшего возобновления переговорного процесса по дорожной карте йеменского урегулирования, формализации заложенных в ней договоренностей и запуска полноценного политпроцесса. Добиться успеха в этом деле возможно исключительно путем диалога и учета законных интересов всех ведущих политических сил страны, включая Ансар-Аллах. В отсутствие обозримых перспектив выхода из кризиса неминуем откат к гражданской войне. Со своей стороны подтверждаем полную поддержку соответствующих усилий спецпосланника Грюнберга. Будем и далее оказывать ему возможное содействие в рамках наших регулярных контактов со всеми йеменскими протагонистами и ключевыми регионалами. Напоминаем также про необходимость эвентуального обновления нормативно-правовой базы урегулирования с тем, чтобы она реалистично отражала сложившуюся ситуацию на земле. Госпожа председатель, к сожалению, наш подход разделяют не все. Вместо того, чтобы подталкивать йеменские стороны к компромиссам, некоторые страны продолжают руководствоваться логикой максимального давления, давно доказавшей свою неэффективность в йеменских реалиях. С огорчением узнали, что решение администрации Соединенных Штатов о признании Ансар-Аллах террористической организацией все-таки вступило в силу 2 дня назад. Мы предостерегали американских коллег, что открытая антагонизация одной из ключевых сторон йеменского конфликта ни к чему хорошему не приведет. Аналогичный шаг Вашингтона в 2021 году лишь обострил конфронтацию и осложнил поиск путей мирного урегулирования в Йемене. Предсказуемы также последствия, которые он наверняка будет иметь для гуманитарного содействия этой стране. В кругах гуманитарщиков уже звучат опасения, что данная мера ограничит возможности для гуманитарного реагирования, создаст проблемы с логистикой и финансированием гуманитарных операций. В интересах всего йеменского народа еще раз призываем Белый дом пересмотреть это решение. Сложности для гуманитарных работников в Йемене, увы, на этом не заканчиваются. До сих пор действует вынужденная приостановка ООН своих гуманитарных операций в провинции Саада, вызванная массовыми задержаниями хуситами местных сотрудников Всемирной организации в конце января сего года. В заключение остаются и задержанные ранее ООНовцы и гуманитарщики. Отмечаем неустанную работу руководителей ООН, направленную на их освобождение. В прошлом месяце члены Совета Безопасности согласовали заявление с сильным сигналом в поддержку этих усилий. Со своей стороны также ведем соответствующую работу и надеемся, что ситуацию в ближайшее время удастся разрешить. Госпожа председатель, в заключение хотели бы подчеркнуть, что налаживание процесса политурегулирования в Йемене стало бы важным вкладом в деэскалацию ситуации по всей стране, во всем регионе. На этом фоне считаем востребованной общую работу по поиску взаимоприемлемых развязок, нацеленных на снижение напряженности и урегулирование кризисов политико-дипломатическими методами на основе международного права. Актуальность сохраняет российская концепция обеспечения коллективной безопасности в зоне Персидского залива, предполагающая поэтапное продвижение к разблокированию конфликтных ситуаций, разработку миродоверия и контроля и в конечном итоге формирование целостной архитектуры коллективной безопасности и сотрудничества, применить которой впоследствии можно будет ко всем странам Ближнего Востока. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the A3 Plus members, Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my country, Sierra Leone. We thank the briefers, Mr. Hans Grunberg, Special Envoy of the United Nations Secretary General for Yemen, Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, and Ms. Nassim Masou Ali for their insightful and comprehensive briefings. We also welcome the participation of the representative of Yemen in today's meeting. Madam President, at the outset, the A3 Plus reiterates and fully supports the UN Secretary General's call for the immediate and unconditional release of all UN humanitarian personnel, diplomatic staff, and civil society actors currently detained by the Houthis. The arbitrary arrests and illegal detentions of these individuals represent a serious violation of international humanitarian law. We are also deeply concerned by the ongoing targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure, as well as the continued erosion of civic space in Yemen. As this Council remains committed to a Yemeni-owned and Yemeni-led political process that will ultimately bring lasting peace to Yemen, we emphasize the need to preserve the hard-won gains to date and underscore the importance of sustained mediation efforts under the auspices of the UN. In this regard, we would like to highlight the following points. First, in light of Yemen's multifaceted political, security, and humanitarian challenges, we stress the importance of a balanced and inclusive process that ensures the safe and meaningful participation of all Yemenis in building the foundation for lasting peace. The A3 Plus fully supports the concerted efforts of the UN and regional actors, including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman, in facilitating dialogue among national actors towards a political settlement based on agreed references. We commend the efforts of the Special Envoy in facilitating de-escalation of tensions and conflict. In this regard, we urge the full implementation of the recommendations from the recent Third Yemen International Forum as part of ongoing community and national-led engagement. Second, the A3 Plus is profoundly concerned by the worsening levels of food insecurity in Yemen, exacerbated by the ongoing hostilities, economic decline, and the climate-related events. The humanitarian situation remains dire as communities continue to suffer from the widespread damage and displacement caused by recent floods, including the catastrophic 2024 floods that destroy homes, farms, and livelihoods. The A3 Plus calls for increased support for the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan, which aims to provide life-saving assistance to 19.5 million people, particularly women, girls, and children, who have been disproportionately affected by the conflict. Despite shrinking aid budget, we recognize the tireless efforts of humanitarian organizations and their personnel to meet the urgent needs of the Yemeni people. We echo the call from USG Fletcher, OCHA, WFP, and other agencies in origin states with influence and means to support these efforts, including finding innovative solutions to mitigate the risk faced by humanitarian workers due to the targeted attacks. Third, the risk of military escalation within Yemen is growing, threatening to undermine the peace process and exacerbates the suffering of the Yemeni people. Stability in the Middle East is at a critical juncture, particularly with the ongoing negotiations to maintain the ceasefire in Gaza and the peace process in Syria, both of which are at critical transitional points. Madam President, we note that in its two most recent monthly reports, the International Maritime Organization has indicated no new incidents have occurred since the previous report, covering the period through 7 February 2025. We hope this positive trend will continue, ultimately leading to a permanent cessation of attacks on merchant and commercial vessels in the Red Sea. This Council must remain resolute in its support for an inclusive political process to address Yemen's political and security challenges. Lasting peace and stability are essential for establishing the necessary national governance system and for restarting oil and gas production and export to revitalize the Yemeni economy. In conclusion, the A3+ remains committed to supporting Special Envoy's diplomatic efforts in facilitating a Yemeni-led, Yemeni-owned political process under the auspices of the UN to ultimately bring lasting peace to Yemen. I thank you.
And I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je remercie l'envoyé spécial du secrétaire général Hans Grunberg, le secrétaire général adjoint aux affaires humanitaires Tom Fletcher, ainsi que Madame Nesma Ali pour leur présentation. Je salue aussi la présence parmi nous du représentant permanent du Yémen. Madame la Présidente, le Conseil de sécurité a dénoncé d'une seule voix les violations systématiques au droit international humanitaire commises par les Houthis. La dernière en date étant le décès le mois dernier d'un travailleur humanitaire du Programme alimentaire mondial détenu dans des conditions inhumaines. La France réitère sa condamnation la plus ferme de la détention arbitraire par les Houthis de dizaines de personnels onusiens et humanitaires, locaux et internationaux, de membres de la société civile yéménite et de missions diplomatiques. Elle appelle à leur libération immédiate et inconditionnelle. Nous exhortons les Houthis à garantir un accès humanitaire sûr et sans entrave à toutes les zones et populations sous leur contrôle et à mettre un terme à toute menace et toute campagne de désinformation à l'encontre des acteurs humanitaires. La France salue l'engagement sans faille des agences onusiennes et humanitaires qui restent présentes sur le terrain. Elle appelle les Houthis à créer les conditions nécessaires à la reprise des activités des Nations Unies dans le gouvernorat de Saada. Par leurs actions, les Houthis portent atteinte à la distribution de l'aide dont la population yéménite a besoin et contribuent à l'aggravation de la crise humanitaire dans le pays. À l'avant-veille de la Journée internationale du droit des femmes, la France rappelle son engagement dans ce domaine et souligne que les conflits et crises humanitaires affectent de façon disproportionnée les femmes, en particulier au Yémen. La France a organisé avec les équipes de l'envoyé spécial un atelier sur l'agenda Femmes, paix et sécurité en marge du sommet de l'IA à Paris début février pour évoquer les défis et opportunités posés par les technologies numériques. Madame la Présidente, la France dénonce les déclarations provocatrices des Houthis au sujet des attaques en mer Rouge dont ils sont les auteurs et qui doivent cesser. Nous poursuivrons notre engagement dans le cadre de l'opération défensive de politique de sécurité et de défense de l'Union européenne Aspides afin de protéger la sûreté maritime et la liberté de navigation conformément au droit international et en lien avec nos partenaires. L'envoyé spécial l'a dit, seule une solution politique mettra fin au conflit. La France réitère à l'envoyé spécial son plein soutien pour préparer la nécessaire reprise du processus de paix. La France réaffirme enfin son attachement à la stabilité du Yémen et à la sécurité régionale. Elle rappelle la nécessité d'éviter toute nouvelle escalade dans la région et appelle l'Iran à cesser son soutien aux actions déstabilisatrices au Moyen-Orient. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, it's good to see you leading the Council in Denmark. Pakistan thanks the Special Envoy of the Secretary General, Mr. Hans Grunberg, and Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Tom Fletcher, for their informative and comprehensive briefings. We also welcome the remarks by Ms. Nesma Ali of the Peace Track Initiative. Madam President, we welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Yemen in this meeting. Yemen continues to face a deepening crisis with severe humanitarian, political, economic, and environmental dimensions. The risk of renewed military escalation threatens to worsen human suffering and undermine efforts for peace. Political divisions persist, with economic collapse and environmental degradation continue to take a devastating toll on the civilian population. It is imperative to reinvigorate political dialogue and take decisive steps to address these underlying challenges while laying the foundation for a sustainable resolution of the crisis in Yemen. In this regard, I would like to make 4 points. First, Pakistan emphasizes the critical role of dialogue in achieving lasting peace in Yemen. We reaffirm our full support for the UN-led peace process and stress the need for an inclusive, comprehensive, and sustainable resolution of the conflict. Regional initiatives, particularly those led by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman, remain critical in advancing these negotiations. The roadmap outlined in December 2023 provides a viable framework for peace. We urge all parties to honor their commitments and fully implement the agreements reached. Second, Yemen faces a multi-dimensional crisis. The humanitarian situation in Yemen is tragic. As we observe the holy month of Ramadan, millions in Yemen continue to endure extreme hardship. 19.5 million require urgent humanitarian assistance, including 9.6 million women. 4.5 million are internally displaced, and 12 million children lack access to basic necessities such as food, water, shelter, and healthcare. In this situation, we must regret deeply the sudden cutoff of funding for the humanitarian operations in Yemen. This gap must be filled by the international community and donor countries, and we hope that all will step up with contributions to the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan for Yemen, as has been appealed by Mr. Tom Fletcher in today's meeting. Third, Madam President, we strongly condemn the arbitrary detention of UN personnel, staff of international and national NGOs, and members of diplomatic missions by Ansarullah, that is the Houthis. These actions not only obstruct humanitarian efforts, but also constitute blatant violations of international humanitarian law. the safety and security of UN personnel and humanitarian workers must be guaranteed. We call for the immediate and unconditional release of all detained individuals. This will also ensure the uninterrupted flow of humanitarian assistance to those in need. Fourth, Pakistan has denounced the Houthi attacks on international shipping. We take note that there have been no new attacks on commercial shipping since the onset of the ceasefire in Gaza. While we unequivocally condemn any such attacks, it is crucial to recognize that the absence of these attacks coincides with the maintenance of the ceasefire in Gaza. This underscores the urgent need to fully implement and preserve the Gaza ceasefire agreement in all its phases. A permanent ceasefire will not only serve the cause of peace in Palestine and with Israel, but also contribute to regional stability, including in Yemen. Madam President, Pakistan remains firmly committed to supporting a Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process facilitated by the United Nations and the Special Envoy. We stand in solidarity with the people of Yemen in their pursuit of peace, security, and prosperity. The international community must act with urgency to prevent further deterioration of the crisis and to pave the way for a future of stability and hope for Yemen. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席女士，我祝贺你担任安理会本月主席。我感谢格伦德伯格特使和弗莱彻副秘书长的通报，也认真听取了民间社会代表的发言。欢迎也门常驻联合国代表出席今天的会议。1月中旬以来，随着加沙停火的实现，红海局势出现缓和迹象。中方呼吁有关各方继续保持克制，推动局势进一步降温，并抓住时机，为推动也门问题的政治解决做出更大努力。政治解决是也门问题的根本出路，也门各方应展现意愿，相向而行，根据也人主导、也人所有的原则，寻求达成全面解决方案。中方赞赏秘书长特使格伦伯格积极开展斡旋。当前最重要的是推动当事方重建互信，为恢复对话沟通创造条件。国际社会有关各方都应为此发挥建设性作用，避免采取任何可能加剧对立、刺激局势升级的行动。也门的经济和人道局势令人担忧，国际社会应继续施以援手，加大而不是削弱，而不是减少提供人道援助，优先保障粮食安全。中方对联合国工作人员继续被扣押表示关切，敦促胡塞方面立即释放所有被扣押的联合国人员。我们呼吁也门各方尊重和履行国际人道法义务，为人道行动提供便利，确保安全和不受阻碍的人道准入，保护人道工作人员安全。主席，也门问题和红海局势同地区环境密切相关。当前，加沙停火能否持续？3阶段停火安排能否实现过渡，面临巨大挑战。 中方支持埃及等阿拉伯国家为推动加沙停火协议持续有效执行，推进加沙人道救援和恢复加沙安全稳定所做的努力。我们呼吁国际社会做出共同努力，推动解决巴勒斯坦问题，恢复也门和红海的和平稳定，实现地区长治久安。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam President. We express our appreciation also to Special Envoy Grundberg, USG Fletcher, as well as Madam Mansour Ali for their briefings today. We also welcome the permanent representative of Yemen to this meeting and wish Yemenis and all those who celebrate around the world a blessed Ramadan. Madam President, the path to peace in Yemen has never been easy. That remains the case today. The path is paved with challenges, vulnerable to regional dynamics, and worsened when parties fail to put the Yemeni people first. These challenges are mounting. Soaring needs and a shrinking humanitarian space have left humanitarian workers in fear for their safety, limiting their life-saving work. Last month, this Council unanimously condemned the death in custody of one of WFP workers and called for the immediate and unconditional release of all those detained by the Houthis. Slovenia repeats this call again today. We also fear that uncertainty around moves to introduce terrorist designations in the Yemeni context, regardless of merit, could have unintended consequences and further compound humanitarian needs. We sincerely hope that this can be avoided. As illustrated powerfully today by Mrs. Mansour Ali, Yemen is one of the world's most climate-vulnerable countries, ravaged by droughts and flooding. Moreover, it is a clear example of how the effects of climate change and conflict together exacerbate food and water insecurity. Slovenia, as a founding member of the Global Alliance to Spare Water from Armed Conflicts, calls for the protection and development of water resources and water infrastructure in Yemen. We strongly believe that water issues can actually be an entry point for grassroots dialogue and mutual understanding between parties, as well as empowering women. Madam President, we cannot discuss Yemen's challenges without touching on the economy. We remain deeply concerned by the deteriorating currency and soaring costs. Recent blackouts in Aden and resulting protests demonstrate that Yemenis yearn for a stable economy and a functioning government. We welcome the deal struck last July on issues relating to the banking sector. We urge the parties to recommit to economic de-escalation and to build upon this agreement. We also stress the importance of unity and coordination within the Presidential Leadership Council. From a security perspective, Slovenia calls for strict compliance with the UN arms embargo, as well as full freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. Persisting hostilities along front lines continue to threaten the lives, safety, and security of civilians. All parties must de-escalate and adhere to international humanitarian law. The fragile calm in the entire region must prevail. We thank both Special Envoy Grundberg and USG Fletcher for important emphasis they made on Yemeni women today. It is worth repeating that when it comes to the challenges facing Yemen, women and girls often endure the most, though they are least responsible for this war. Slovenia reiterates its commitment to the Women, Peace and Security agenda and to the protection and promotion of human rights for all in Yemen. This will only be possible through accountability and with independent and impartial human rights monitoring across the country. This should in turn enable Yemen's vibrant civil society and private sector to help lay the foundations for the future of Yemen. Madam President, no, the path to peace in Yemen has never been easy. But yes, we hold on to hope in the Special Envoy's conviction that a sustainable resolution to this conflict remains possible. By addressing root causes and through political will and courageous leadership, from the parties, peace should be achievable. We reiterate our full support to the whole UN system in this effort. A return to all-out war must be avoided at all costs. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Panamá agradece a la presidenta del Consejo por convocar esta reunión, a la vez que le extiende las seguridades de nuestro apoyo a su gestión y al éxito de la misma. Agradecemos también al enviado especial del secretario general para el Yemen, Hans Grunberg, y al subsecretario general para Asuntos Humanitarios y coordinador de socorro de emergencia, Tom Fletcher, por sus valiosos aportes. Reconocemos también los valiosos aportes de la participación de Nesma Ali y al distinguido representante de Yemen en la reunión. Le extendemos la más cordial bienvenida. Expresamos preocupación al no registrar avances desde nuestra última reunión con relación a la detención ilegal e injustificada de los 23 colaboradores de las Naciones Unidas por parte de los hutíes. Por ello, reiteramos lo mencionado anteriormente y con la misma urgencia por la liberación inmediata e incondicional de todo el personal de las Naciones Unidas, de las organizaciones no gubernamentales y del cuerpo diplomático, así como el respeto absoluto a los derechos humanos fundamentales de todos los trabajadores humanitarios, quienes desempeñan un papel crucial en la promoción de la paz, la estabilidad y el desarrollo. El conflicto interno en Yemen ha desencadenado una crisis humanitaria devastadora, considerada una de las más graves a nivel mundial. El colapso económico, los desastres climáticos y la escalada regional han exacerbado las necesidades de asistencia y aumentado los riesgos para la protección de la población. El panorama humanitario mundial señala que Yemen es el tercer país más vulnerable al cambio climático, con su clima semiárido y fenómenos extremos como sequías e inundaciones, lo que agrava sus vulnerabilidades. La degradación ambiental, la crisis humanitaria y el conflicto prolongado aumentan la inseguridad alimentaria, la escasez de agua y el desplazamiento de poblaciones. En este contexto, es crucial integrar la mitigación ambiental en las iniciativas de consolidación de paz para reducir riesgos, fortalecer la estabilidad y promover la resiliencia comunitaria. Panamá reconoce los vínculos entre el clima, la paz y la seguridad, entendiendo que son factores interrelacionados que impactan directamente el bienestar de las naciones. En este sentido, abogamos por un enfoque integral que combine desarrollo sostenible, resiliencia y reducción de vulnerabilidades como bases fundamentales para alcanzar una paz duradera. Por otro lado, Yemen sigue gravemente contaminado por minas terrestres, minas marinas, artefactos explosivos improvisados y otros restos explosivos de guerra cuyas consecuencias impactan tanto a la población como el medio ambiente. Apoyamos en ese sentido la labor de las entidades de las Naciones Unidas en sus esfuerzos por eliminar los riesgos asociados a estos artefactos, proteger a los civiles y trabajadores humanitarios y avanzar en el desminado de la región. Por otra parte, el sufrimiento de las mujeres yemeníes a causa de las limitaciones al acceso humanitario, a los servicios de salud, así como a causa de prejuicios y matrimonios juveniles, no deben pasar desapercibidos. Lo descrito por Tom Fletcher en su dramática intervención es un escándalo y la suspensión de fondos para el apoyo humanitario es otro. En este momento crítico, resulta fundamental que este Consejo actúe con firmeza para garantizar que la ayuda humanitaria llegue sin obstáculos a quienes más la requieren. Es nuestra responsabilidad asegurar que los recursos, el apoyo y la asistencia lleguen de manera eficaz y sin pausa ni disminuciones, siempre priorizando el bienestar del pueblo yemení. Es fundamental fortalecer el financiamiento y la cooperación internacional para lograr un Yemen más seguro y facilitar la reconstrucción sostenible del país. Gracias, señora Presidente.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by thanking Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Under-Secretary General Tom Fletcher for their informative briefings. I would also like to welcome the presence here today of Mrs. Ali, representative of the civil society of Yemen, as well as a permanent representative of Yemen, and wish to all who celebrate today Ramadan Mubarak. Madam President, the situation on the ground remains fragile and the risk of military escalation has not eclipsed, while the efforts to agree on a new national ceasefire have not succeeded. At the same time, the humanitarian situation remains dire, and many members of humanitarian agencies remain under custody and face unjustified charges. We call on the Houthis to immediately release all diplomatic staff, UN and NGO personnel, and humanitarian workers who are arbitrarily under detention, and to hold accountable all those responsible for the recent death of a member of the UN World Food Programme under Houthi custody. Madam President, allow me to highlight briefly 3 points. First, Greece unequivocally supports the work of the Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and his tireless efforts to reinvigorate the dialogue between the parties with the aim to achieve a new national ceasefire. This will create a fertile terrain in order to negotiate a Yemeni-led, Yemeni-owned political process that will end the long-standing instability and uncertainty in the country and will ensure the conditions for economic prosperity and welfare for the Yemeni people. Secondly, as an historic seafaring nation, Greece firmly supports the freedom of navigation and the full applicability of the international law of the sea as reflected in UNCLOS. Moreover, my country remains committed to safeguarding maritime security in the region of the Red Sea and will continue to do its part in order to protect one of the world's most important maritime routes. This is why Greece participates in the EU operation Aspides in the Red Sea and will continue to provide valuable support to this mission. Thirdly, we would like to echo calls on all parties to refrain from any escalatory action that could pose risks for environmental disasters, especially in the Red Sea. The cases of FSO Safar and the Greek-flagged MV Sunion clearly demonstrated how serious the potential environmental and humanitarian consequences of the conflict can be. We are thankful to all those that contribute to the prevention of a grave environmental disaster in both cases. In addition, we fully support all initiatives by the international community to manage the effects of adverse climate conditions and its impact on accessible resources, especially in war-torn countries such as Yemen. Madam President, we also remain deeply concerned on the overall deteriorating situation of women and girls in the country, commend their resilience and courage, and will support all efforts to alleviate the suffering and safeguard their rights. Madam President, in closing, let me stress that this Council and the countries of the region must send a clear message of unity and commitment to the need for de-escalation and dialogue between the opposing sides of the Yemeni conflict, and especially the Houthis. We also call for unity within the Presidential Leadership Council. At the same time, the Council and all relevant actors of the international community must do the utmost to support the Presidential Leadership Council and the legitimate, recognized government of Yemen in the colossal task to support Yemeni society and strengthen public institutions amidst a complex economic situation. I thank you.
And I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, I join my colleagues in congratulating Denmark for assuming the Council's presidency in March. My gratitude also goes to today's insightful briefers, and I welcome the participation of the representative of Yemen to this meeting. Today, I'd like to make the following points. First, we demand that the Houthis permanently cease all hostile activities, including those against merchant vessels, which jeopardize maritime security and free navigation in the region. While we welcome the pause in attacks in the Red Sea and on Israel, the Houthis have also repeatedly declared their readiness to resume such attacks if the ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza breaks down. This is unacceptable. A recent report reveals a 50% decline in Red Sea shipping traffic since 2023, disrupting vital global trade routes and a critical lifeline for humanitarian assistance in Yemen, as well as compounding Yemen's economic hardships. Second, we reiterate our call for the release of all detainees, including UN, NGOs, civil society, and diplomatic personnel, without delay. Despite the Security Council's press statement on February 13, demanding the immediate and unconditional release of all detainees and strongly condemning ongoing detentions, the Houthis persistently refuse to heed the international community's unified call. In this regard, we remind the Houthis of the March 1st letter from UN agencies and NGOs on the occasion of the holy month of Ramadan. We also remind the Houthis of the Secretary General's appeal for a thorough, immediate, and transparent investigation to hold those responsible accountable. Third, we emphasize once again the faithful implementation of all relevant Security Council resolutions, especially the targeted arms embargo. Indeed, abiding by the arms embargo is a fundamental prerequisite for the stability of both Yemen and the wider region. On this point, we believe that the international community should pay elevated attention to the UN verification and inspection mechanism for Yemen, UNVIM, and the Yemeni government's maritime security efforts, including its Coast Guard capacity building, to ensure stronger adherence to the arms embargo. Fourth, as USG Tom Fletcher and the CSO briefer Ms. Ali clearly illustrated today, Yemen's humanitarian crisis is worsening. The Republic of Korea remains committed to addressing humanitarian needs of the Yemeni people, including women and children, particularly in climate-linked food insecurity and malnutrition. As part of our efforts to this end, 23,000 tons of rice will be delivered to the people of Yemen in cooperation with the World Food Programme this year. We hope this assistance will support refugees and internally displaced persons who are suffering from nutritional deficiency. We are also supporting an International Organization for Migration, IOM project, to empower women in water-related conflict resolution and climate adaptation. 14.5 million Yemeni people lack access to safe drinking water, making it one of the world's most water-scarce nations. Surging temperatures and erratic rainfall exacerbate already dire water shortages, directly endangering the livelihoods of Yemenis and the country's stability. Lastly, Madam President, as Special Envoy Grundberg recently emphasized, the international community, including key regional countries, must not lose sight of Yemen amid a fluid international security environment. Indeed, our continued diplomatic, financial, and humanitarian support for Yemen is now more vital than ever. As broader shifts in the situation in the Middle East transpire, we strongly hope for the creation of an atmosphere that fosters a forward momentum in the political process in Yemen. The Republic of Korea reaffirms its commitment to an inclusive, Yemeni-led political transition under UN auspices and remains steadfast in alleviating the suffering of Yemeni people. I thank you, Madam President.
And I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Denmark. Like others, I want to stand by thanking Special Envoy Grundberg and Under-Secretary General Fletcher for their briefings. I wish to give a special thank you to our civil society briefer, Nesma Mansour Ali, for bringing new perspectives to the Council today on the need to address the often overlooked effects of climate change in Yemen and its impact of insecurity and conflict. And I also welcome the representative of Yemen to our meeting today. Colleagues, allow me to make 3 points. First, as we have heard from USG Fletcher this morning, the continuing deterioration of the humanitarian situation in Yemen is deeply concerning and having staggering consequences for, in particular, women and girls. With an economy on the brink of collapse, persistent electricity cuts, severe food insecurity and acute water scarcity for too many Yemenis, it is hard to maintain hope. The humanitarian needs are further compounded by the exacerbating impacts of climate change. As the third most vulnerable country to climate change in the world, Yemen is highly affected by climate-induced disasters, including droughts and floods. The convergence of prolonged conflict, environmental degradation, and climate change has created a perfect storm of crisis with competition over scarce resources, threatening Yemen's short and long-term peace and stability. As Council members, we must do more to make sure that the climate considerations are integrated into peace-building strategies, local mediation efforts, and future peace settlement process. We urge the international community to support the Yemeni government in addressing those challenges. Second, the Houthis continue to unlawfully detain UN staff and humanitarian personnel, many of whom have spent years delivering assistance to the people the Houthis claim to serve. The tragic death of a WFP staff member held in Houthi detention last month underscores the urgency of ensuring the release of all those arbitrarily detained. We call on the Houthis to do so immediately and without preconditions, and we demand that their rights are respected in line with international law. We appreciate the Council speaking in one voice, condemning this by adopting a press statement last month. As in all other conflicts on this Council's agenda, safe, rapid, and unimpeded access for all humanitarian access are non-negotiable requirements. Third and finally, the Houthis' threats to further escalate attacks in the Red Sea will not make Yemenis' lives easier or more secure. Rather, they risk throwing Yemen further into the regional turmoil and an endless spiral of retaliatory violence. Attacks against international merchant vessels, regardless of their origin or destination, have no justification. Freedom of navigation must be respected in line with international law. Denmark will continue to defend this as part of the EU Operation Aspides. We further underscore the need to reinforce the targeted arms embargo on the Houthis. In closing, the Houthis must refocus their efforts on addressing the needs of the millions of Yemenis who have suffered over a decade of war by engaging in the UN-led political process towards a lasting solution to the conflict. Denmark expresses full support for the efforts led by UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg. We encourage all stakeholders to engage actively with his office to pave the way for a resumption of the political process. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Yemen.
شكرا السيدة الرئيسة. نعبر عن سعادتنا أن نراكم سعادة السفيرة كريستينا في رئاسة هذا المجلس لهذا الشهر، متمنيا لكم ولوفدكم الصديق كل التوفيق في مهامكم، وأشكر سلفكم المندوب الدائم للصين على رئاسته لهذا المجلس، رئاسته الناجحة لهذا المجلس في الشهر الماضي. أشكر السيد هانس جروندبرغ والسيد توم فليتشر والأخت نسمة منصور علي على إحاطتهم. السيد الرئيس، في ظل استمرار الصراع الذي يدخل عامه 11، يقف اليمن اليوم على مفترق طرق، حيث يتطلع شعبنا اليمني الصابر إلى السلام المنشود وإنهاء معاناته التي استمرت طويلا، إلا أن تحقيق آمال وتطلعات شعبنا وانتصار إرادته لم يكتب له النجاح بسبب النهج المدمر للميليشيات الحوثية الإرهابية المدعومة من إيران ورفضها لكل الجهود والمساعي الإقليمية والدولية لتحقيق السلام وتهربها المستمر من استحقاقاته عبر تصعيدها وتحشيدها العسكري على مختلف الجبهات وخروقاتها لكل الالتزامات ومخططاتها بالعودة إلى مربع الحرب الشاملة وإغراق اليمن في أزمة إنسانية غير مسبوقة. وفي هذا السياق يجدد مجلس القيادة الرئاسي والحكومة اليمنية حرصهما على التعاطي الإيجابي مع كافة المبادرات والجهود الإقليمية والدولية وجهود الأمم المتحدة عبر مبعوثها الخاص لليمن للوصول إلى تسوية سياسية للأزمة اليمنية وإنهاء هذه الحرب المدمرة استنادا إلى مرجعيات الحل السياسي المتفق عليها، وفي مقدمتها قرار مجلس الأمن 2216 الذي يمثل ركيزة أساسية وخارطة الطريق لمعالجة الأزمة اليمنية. أن تحقيق السلام العادل والشامل والمستدام في اليمن يتطلب دعما دوليا وخلق شراكة استراتيجية تترجم إلى خطوات عملية لدعم جهود الحكومة اليمنية وإنهاء الانقلاب واستعادة مؤسسات الدولة وبسط سيطرتها على كامل التراب اليمني، وضمان أمن البحر الأحمر ومضيق باب المندب وتحويله من مصدر تهديد إلى جسر للسلام كما كان عبر التاريخ، وتنفيذ قرارات حظر تدفق الأسلحة من النظام الإيراني إلى الميليشيات الحوثية، لأن ذلك يشكل مصدر تهديد للأمن والسلم الأقليمي والدولي وإطالة أمد الصراع ومفاقمة الأزمة الإنسانية لليمنيين. السيد الرئيس، ترحب الحكومة اليمنية بإعلان وزارة الخارجية الأمريكية دخول تصنيف الميليشيات الحوثية كمنظمة إرهابية أجنبية حيز النفاذ. إن هذا القرار يمثل خطوة هامة لمواجهة التهديدات التي تشكلها هذه الميليشيات المدعومة من النظام الإيراني، والتي استهدفت أفعالها الإرهابية المدنيين والبنى التحتية في اليمن والدول المجاورة، وكذا استهدافها للسفن التجارية في البحر الأحمر في تهديد مستمر لأمن وسلامة الملاحة وطرق التجارة الدولية. وتؤكد الحكومة اليمنية على دعمها الكامل لهذا التصنيف كأداة فعالة للحد من الدعم المادي والمالي لهذه الميليشيات، كما تجدد دعوتها للمجتمع الدولي لاتخاذ خطوات مماثلة لتجفيف مصادر تمويل الحوثيين وتسليحهم وتعزيز الجهود الرامية لاستعادة الاستقرار وإحلال السلام في اليمن. تؤكد الحكومة اليمنية على التزامها واستعدادها الكامل للتعاون مع الشركاء في المجتمع الدولي لضمان تنفيذ هذا القرار بما يخدم مصالح الشعب اليمني ويعزز السلام والأمن في المنطقة، واتخاذ الإجراءات اللازمة لتوجيه متطلبات هذا التصنيف نحو أهدافه الرئيسية في تفكيك بنية الميليشيات الحوثية الإرهابية دون إضرار بمصالح المواطنين والمساعدات الإغاثية والواردات الغذائية والأنشطة التجارية، والتخفيف من أي آثار سلبية تنعكس على الوضع الإنساني. السيد الرئيس، تواجه اليمن تحديات هائلة ذات أبعاد اقتصادية وإنسانية واجتماعية ومؤسسية بسبب الحرب التي شنتها الميليشيات الحوثية أدت إلى خسارة اليمن أكثر من نصف دخله القومي بما يعادل 250 مليار دولار، وتدهور العملة الوطنية وارتفاع معدلات التضخم التراكمي وارتفاع نسبة البطالة إلى 80%. وتبذل الحكومة اليمنية جهودا كبيرة لمواجهة هذه التحديات ووضع الأولويات العاجلة لتحقيق الاستقرار الاقتصادي والقدرة على الصمود، ووضع خطط قصيرة الأجل لإيقاف التدهور في الوضع الاقتصادي والإنساني وإرساء أسس التنمية الاقتصادية وتعزيز الحوكمة وصمود القطاع الخاص. ونتطلع إلى مضاعفة الدعم من قبل المجتمع الدولي وشركاء اليمن في التنمية وإعادة توجيهه بحسب الأولويات في المجالات الاقتصادية والتنموية والإنسانية والخدمية، وأهمية البناء على نتائج الاجتماع الوزاري رفيع المستوى الذي عقد في مطلع هذا العام لدعم جهود الحكومة اليمنية، وما قدمه من رسائل دعم اقتصادية وسياسية للحكومة اليمنية وإصلاحاتها ورؤيتها للتعافي الاقتصادي والمسارات الخمسة الرئيسية التي تضمنتها هذه الرؤية، مما يؤدي إلى مواجهة التحديات القائمة ومعالجتها. وفي هذا الإطار نثمن عاليا الدعم المقدم من الأشقاء في المملكة العربية السعودية للشعب اليمني وحكومته في مختلف المجالات في هذه الظروف الاستثنائية والصعبة، وكذلك دعم كل الأشقاء والأصدقاء للتخفيف من المعاناة الإنسانية عن الشعب اليمني. السيد الرئيس، وإذ نرحب بالوحدة التي أظهرها هذا المجلس الموقر من خلال إدانته الشديدة للاحتجازات التعسفية المستمرة لموظفي وكالات الأمم المتحدة والمنظمات الدولية العاملة في اليمن ومنظمات المجتمع المدني والبعثات الدبلوماسية، ودعوته بالإفراج الفوري وغير المشروط عن جميع المعتقلين، إلا أننا نؤكد على أهمية ممارسة الضغط على الميليشيات الحوثية واتخاذ إجراءات صارمة لوقف انتهاكاتها والإفراج الفوري دون قيد أو شرط عن كافة المختطفين والمحتجزين. ونذكر مجددا بتحذير الحكومة اليمنية من أن هذه الميليشيات لن تتوقف عن ابتزاز المجتمع الدولي، وستقوم بالمزيد من هذه الاعتقالات والانتهاكات ضد المدنيين والعاملين في المجال الإنساني، ولن تتوقف عن إساءة معاملة المحتجزين قسرا في سجونها. وفي هذا السياق تطالب الحكومة اليمنية مجددا بنقل مقرات وكالات الأمم المتحدة والمنظمات الدولية العاملة في اليمن إلى العاصمة المؤقتة عدن لضمان بيئة آمنة ومستقرة للعمل الإنساني والإغاثي دون أي عوائق، والحد من عمليات النهب التي تمارسها الميليشيات الحوثية، وتسخير المساعدات لصالح ما يسمى بالمجهود الحربي لاستمرار حربها ضد الشعب اليمني. السيد الرئيس، في الوقت الذي تستعرض فيه الدول الأعضاء في الأمم المتحدة الأسبوع القادم التقدم المحرز في تنفيذ إعلان ومنهاج عمل بكين خلال أعمال الدورة 69 للجنة الأمم المتحدة المعنية بوضع المرأة، ونحن نقترب من الاحتفال باليوم العالمي للمرأة، عملت الميليشيات الحوثية على تدمير كل الإنجازات التي تحققت للنساء اليمنيات، حيث تواصل هذه الميليشيات انتهاكاتها الجسيمة وجرائم الاختطاف والاعتقال لمئات النساء اليمنيات وحرمانهن من حقوقهن السياسية والاقتصادية والاجتماعية وحقهن في التعليم، والزج بهن في المعتقلات والسجون السرية وتلفيق التهم الكيدية وممارسة شتى صنوف الابتزاز والتعذيب النفسي والجسدي والتحرش والاعتداء الجنسي على خلفية نشاطهن السياسي والإعلامي والحقوقي، وحرمانهن من المشاركة السياسية للإسهام في بناء وتنوير المجتمع اليمني. ومثال على هذه الجرائم هو مأساة السيدة رباب البضواحي التي اختطفتها الميليشيات الحوثية منذ 9 أشهر، وتوفت منذ أيام والدتها قهرا وحزنا على احتجاز بنتها وإخفائها قسرا. إن هذه المأساة هي امتداد للممارسات الإجرامية بحق المدنيين الأبرياء في مناطق سيطرة هذه الميليشيات، وهذه الجريمة ليست مأساة فردية فقط، بل تمثل سياسة ممنهجة ونموذج صارخا للجرائم التي تمارسها هذه الميليشيات عبر الاختطاف والتعذيب وإرهاب العائلات بوسائل مختلفة، مما أدى إلى وفاة العديد من الأمهات قهرا وحزنا على مصير أبنائهن وبناتهن في سجون هذه الميليشيات في ظروف غير إنسانية، في انتهاك صارخ لقانون حقوق الإنسان والقانون الدولي الإنساني. شكرا للسيد الرئيس.
شكرا كتير. I thank the representative of Yemen for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.